In 2019, a family in rural Ohio purchased an antique mirror from an estate sale. It was beautiful. Ornate wooden frame, dark mahogany, hand-carved roses along the edges. The kind of mirror you'd find in a Victorian manor. The seller warned them only once not to hang it in a bedroom. They didn't listen. Within 3 weeks, the mother stopped sleeping. The youngest daughter refused to walk past it. And the father, a former military man who said he feared nothing, smashed every mirror in the house with a baseball bat at 3 in the morning. What did they see inside that mirror? This is the documented account of the Harlow family. And what happened to them will make you think twice before looking at your own reflection tonight. The Harlow family, David, Susan, and their 2 daughters, Emma, aged 9, and Claire, aged 14, had moved into their farmhouse in Clermont County, Ohio, just 4 months before the incident began. David was a 42-year-old electrician. Susan worked part-time at a local school. By all accounts, they were a normal, grounded family. No history of mental illness. No prior experiences with the paranormal. Church-going, practical, skeptical people. In September 2019, Susan visited a local estate sale, the belongings of an elderly woman named Margaret Voss, who had passed away at age 91 with no living relatives. Among the furniture and antiques, Susan spotted the mirror. It stood nearly 5 feet tall. The frame was extraordinary dark mahogany carved with roses and small faces, almost like cherubs, frozen in expressions that Susan later described as not quite happy, not quite sad, something in between. The asking price was $40. The estate sale organizer, a woman named Patris, pulled Susan aside quietly before she paid. That mirror, Patris said, has been in Margaret's family for over 100 years. She kept it covered with a black cloth for the last 30 years of her life. She told me once, Patris paused, she told me it shows you things that aren't there. Susan smiled politely, paid $40, took the mirror home. That night, she hung it on the wall of the master bedroom. The first thing happened 3 days later. It was a Tuesday morning. Susan was getting ready for work, standing in front of the mirror, applying makeup. She leaned close to check her eyeliner. And in the reflection, just for a fraction of a second, she saw someone standing behind her. A figure, tall, thin, standing completely still in the bedroom doorway. She spun around instantly. The doorway was empty. Susan stood there for a full minute, heart pounding, staring at the empty doorway. Then she looked back at the mirror, just her own reflection, nothing else. She told herself it was tiredness, a trick of the light. She'd been sleeping poorly since the move, stress, new house, new routines. She went to work and said nothing to David. But the next morning it happened again. This time the figure was closer. Not in the doorway, closer, maybe 6 feet behind her. And this time she could see more detail. It was a woman, tall and extremely thin, with long dark hair hanging over her face, wearing something dark, standing perfectly, unnaturally still. Susan spun around again. Empty room. She looked back at the mirror, her own face. Pale, terrified. That evening she told David. He laughed gently, kissed her forehead, and said she was overtired. He stood in front of the mirror himself for 2 full minutes. He saw nothing unusual. "It's just a mirror, Suz," he said. For 4 more days nothing happened. Susan began to relax. Maybe David was right. Then Emma, their 9-year-old, came to them at breakfast one morning with dark circles under her eyes. "Mommy," Emma said quietly, "the lady in your mirror keeps waving at me." David covered the mirror with a bedsheet that same morning. He still didn't fully believe, but he was a father first. If the mirror was upsetting his children, it would be covered. Simple as that. For 6 days, the sheet stayed on. 6 quiet, uneventful days. Emma slept normally. Susan relaxed. David was satisfied. On the 7th night, Susan woke at 2:47 a.m. to a sound, a soft, repetitive sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across glass. She lay still in the darkness, listening. David was asleep beside her. The house was silent except for that sound. Scratch, 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 coming from the mirror. She reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The bedsheet was still covering the mirror, but it was moving, slowly, rhythmically, as if something on the other side was pressing against it, pushing outward, feeling the edges. Susan screamed. David was awake in an instant. He crossed the room in 3 steps and ripped the sheet off the mirror. Nothing, just their own reflections. 2 terrified people in a dark bedroom. But the sheet, when Susan picked it up, had marks on it. Long, thin pressure marks. from something pressing outward from the glass.
David called a priest the next morning. Father Raymond Carroll visited the home that afternoon. He was 67 years old, had performed 3 official exorcisms in his career, and described himself as deeply skeptical of most paranormal claims. He spent 45 minutes alone in the bedroom with the mirror. When he came out, his face was white. He refused to tell David and Susan what he had seen. He said only 3 things. First, the mirror needed to leave the house immediately. Second, do not look into it after dark under any circumstances. Third, he would be praying for their family. Then he left and never returned their calls again. David decided the mirror would go to the garage that evening. He would deal with disposing of it properly the next day. But before he could move it, Claire, their 14-year-old, did something that changed everything. Claire had been the quietest during all of this. Teenagers, David thought. She seemed unaffected. Unbothered. What her parents didn't know was that Claire had been visiting the mirror alone. Every night for 2 weeks, standing in front of it in the dark. She later told investigators that the woman in the mirror had been speaking to her. Not out loud. Not in words exactly. More like thoughts that weren't her own, appearing in her mind when she stared at her reflection long enough. The woman told Claire her name was Vera. She said she had been inside the mirror for a very long time. She said she was lonely. She said Claire was special, that she could see her more clearly than the others. She said she wanted to come through. That night at 11 p.m. David heard a crash from upstairs. He ran to find Claire standing in front of the uncovered mirror, both palms pressed flat against the glass, eyes wide open, completely unresponsive. She was whispering something. Over and over. David grabbed her shoulders and pulled her back. She didn't resist. She didn't react at all. Her palms left 2 perfect fog prints on the glass. And in the mirror, David saw it. He never described it in full detail to anyone. In the police report he stated only that he saw, quote, a face that was not my daughter's looking back from her reflection. He grabbed the mirror, carried it outside, and smashed it against the driveway with his bare hands. Then he went inside and smashed every other mirror in the house. Claire came back to herself slowly, over the next hour. She remembered nothing after pressing her hands to the glass. The mirror's remains were buried in the backyard. David poured concrete over the spot. 3 months later they sold the house and moved to another state. Researchers who investigated the Harlow case traced the mirror's history back to 1887. It had been crafted by a German carpenter named Wilhelm Kessler in Bavaria. Records show that 4 families who owned the mirror over the following century reported nearly identical experiences, a tall thin figure appearing in the reflection, children being communicated with, and in 2 cases, family members requiring psychiatric care after prolonged exposure. The identity of Vera, the entity Claire spoke with, was never determined. Paranormal investigators believe the mirror functioned as what is called a spirit vessel, an object that through age, trauma, or deliberate ritual becomes a doorway between worlds. The reflection, they say, is not showing you the room behind you. It is showing you somewhere else entirely. The Harlow family declined to be named in this account. The details have been verified through police records, the testimony of Father Carroll's assistant, and Claire's own written account, which she published anonymously at age 19. She ended that account with a single piece of advice. If you ever buy an antique mirror, and the seller tells you to keep it covered, believe them. If this story sent chills down your spine, you're not alone. Subscribe to DE Stories for true supernatural horror every single week. Hit the bell. Share this with someone who won't sleep tonight. And tell me in the comments, do you have a mirror in your bedroom right now? Look at it carefully before you answer. Good night.